We're going live. It's so slow. All right. We're live. All right. So, Cliff, I'm so excited to talk to you about this. And if you're one of my subscribers, you know that I don't put a lot of attention into this topic because I feel that there is so much disinformation. So, I figured who else could I talk to about anything like of this sort, other realms, aliens, ETs, whatever you want to call them, and really like the secret space program and stuff. So, I've been doing a little bit of research on it, and I couldn't think of anybody else better to ask besides Cliff. So, Cliff, thanks for coming on. Always.
Sure. Thank you much. It's fun stuff. I like talking about the real woo-woo subjects.
Yes, yes. So I mean, I guess we'll start like, all right, I have so many things to ask about because I recently watched a documentary and stuff. So I guess we'll start with, I want to know what do you think the secret space program is? Tell me like your knowledge on it and what you think its main purpose is and
Okay,
where.
that goes to the why question. I generally leave out, right?
Okay.
Because it's hard to say what intent is.
Okay.
A secret space program could be useful to us Earthers and our Earther government at many different levels. One of which might be literally just putting stuff in space in order to be able to generate activity, wealth, economy, and then not have to deal with the consequences of that wealth. This is something most people don't understand. If we were to produce everything that everybody could possibly want, and it could be delivered relatively cheaply and free of cost, then we would crash the entire global economy forever until all that stuff rotted or whatever. That what drives us is the attempt to fulfill demand in a scarcity constrained environment. In the past, we've used wars. We would take all of the steel we had, we would make it into weapons and throw it away at somebody and let it all explode. And then we would have to replace all that steel. So the steel workers would have work, and the 7-Eleven guys near the steel workers, et cetera, et cetera. So the space thing is a very good way to put stuff into the economy to generate wealth and then to get it out of the economy for some eventual return, but at a more measured rate. Okay. So it would be okay for us to create enough chairs for everybody on the planet if we could take all of those chairs and store them on the moon and then just bring them back as we need them. I'm hypothesizing a really wacky example, but that's really the way economies work. So the space program could have that kind of a one of its goals, which
Right.
is to increase employment and so forth, right? Another one is they may actually believe that there are threats out there. Now, I actually personally think, because of my long history going back and reading these kind of materials way back into the 50s, that is a motivating factor, fear, that on the part of the upper echelon, there's fear involved when associated with space and aliens.
Okay.
And they apparently also have some reason for that fear that has sort of maybe filtered into the general discussion, but we don't know for sure. So if we were to just say that, well, it's probably the fear that's motivating all of this, then the secret space program would make sense in being able to prepare as best you could. We should really discuss aliens and contact and all of that stuff as a separate part of that.
Right.
But from a secret space program viewpoint, it might make sense to go on out there and prepare for this. Now, here's where it gets interesting. All right. I've actually seen the secret space program in my understanding. And that is that I've got these night vision goggles. Excuse my reach. I've got these night vision goggles. Third generation. You pop a couple of batteries in there, never store them with the batteries in there or they'll rust out the way that they did for Bix Weir. But anyway, and I'll repair his for him. But anyway, you get these and you look out at certain constellations about an hour and a half after sunset, and you can see activity that is clearly not satellites because it's directional, it's moving, they're doing stuff, they're turning around and this kind of thing. There's multiples of them. The vision of them that's delivered through the goggles has these little triangles of 3 little pixels for each one of these little triangle ships. So it sort of represents the shape of the thing you're looking at. These are very high quality magnifying goggles. They see well out to about 145 miles from the surface of the Earth. And if you get the sunlight just right, because you're having the sun come back to us, so to speak, from where I am, from Hawaii, at the time I'm looking, illuminates everything up there with just enough light that these goggles are picking it up in sharp relief. And so I've seen a secret space program. I'm assuming it's Earth-based. I'm assuming it's USA-based, but I don't have any really factual information to say that that's the case, other than all of these trails through the literature and everything else. I've also seen them doing what I perceive to be US style maneuvering and training in squadrons. And each nation has their own approach to this sort of thing. And so I think that I do have some reasons to believe that these are USA-based secret space program. And, you know, and also you could say, well, they're out there to help clean up all of the bazillion pieces of space junk, which is true. And it's starting to interfere with reception and all of this sort of thing. So there's any number of reasons to do this. Now, a reason to keep it secret, well, you wouldn't want necessarily, if you were going to look at it as a military asset, you wouldn't want it to be known by your enemies. But also another thing another problem in our day and age is you wouldn't want it known by your own citizenry, because especially in our country, there might be lawsuits that would pop up. So for instance, you know, they can't do anything. They've got the chemtrails can never be acknowledged because they would have to face environmental impact and liability lawsuits, and that can't happen. Same thing with a lot of the incredibly terrible waste in terms of, you know, material falling to Earth from all these weird rockets that they were trying to shoot off all in the 60s and the 70s. And they were all classified. It was all hushed up and top secret because they couldn't afford the environmental impact lawsuits that would arise if people found out what they were actually doing with all of this stuff. See, so there's ramifications that go in all different kinds of directions that would tend to favor a secrecy approach. Now, we also have to acknowledge that this is how they've had success in the past, okay? So in the past, we had a situation where we had this secret technology. It was sort of known throughout the public. I'm talking way in the past. And that secret technology was essentially airplanes, which were militarized. And within our Army, they became the Army Air Corps because the Army put in the dollars to develop the technology. Now, the Navy did the same. That's why the Navy developed aircraft carriers and so on. There was like 2 different technology paths. And at some point in that process, the government decided, well, the air strategically is its own battlefield, the same way Earth is for the Army and the sea is for the Navy. We need to have things that can fight in this new plane of battle, which we'll call the atmosphere. And so they created the Air Force. And so we're at that juxtaposition of events, circumstances, pressures, and needs right now, where we've got the infantry and so forth and all of that for land battles. We've got the Navy for sea battles, the Air Force for the air battles. Now we need the Space Force for space battles. Even if we're only going to fight other humans, right? We still would need that. So all of this makes sense. And it also makes sense that if you had a secret space program, the idea is that you could unveil it by creating the Space Force and then basically populating it with the assets you want from your secret Space Force that you've been developing all of this time. And your citizenry is none the wiser. And that's probably the plan they've got for a huge amount of technology.
Okay, well, that was not the answer that I was thinking at all. Like and that's good to hear that because that makes a little more logical sense. So we're going to get into the aliens and stuff, but do you believe that they take people up into, these spaceships and then they're doing like trading with ETs and stuff, kind of like, some of these conspiracies, like that's
well,
kind of
okay. So all right. So this is another answer you're probably not going to want to hear, but,
okay.
but let's look at it another way. Okay. Yes, I believe that I'm of the opinion that these ships are actually manned. Okay, they could be flown by remote control these days.
Right.
So they could just be totally, or one person could fly 50 ships if they were all in a squadron kind of a thing. But I actually think that they're manned for a variety of reasons. Now, as to the ETs and all of this kind of stuff, it's my understanding that there is life um, that is not human, that is intelligent, that is not of this planet and has existed for a great amount of time. Now, whether or not we've got the army trading with grays or any of this sort of thing, it comes down to my basic understanding of universe and how I approach this. So other people are out there saying, oh, well, look, oh, for instance, all right, so there's another aspect of the secret space program, and that's the bullshit side of things, okay? In the bullshit side of things, you've got people that are out there saying, well, I was a secret space program pilot or Marine, and I went and killed all of these aliens on these other planets. And you've got them saying that I was the galactic ambassador and all of this kind of stuff. All, in my opinion, all of that's bullshit. And a lot of the stuff that they present in the way of alien kind of information, I find to be contradictory to reality, and therefore it's bullshit. And that actually brings in why I think this way and is a better way to explain my thinking on it. So let's take an example. So you've got Corey Good out there saying that there are these 6 foot high or higher intelligent blue space aliens. And I called them, to denigrate them and categorize them, I called them the blue space chickens. And,
That's what that is. Okay, because I never, like, I heard you say that, but I didn't know what the hell you were talking about.
Right, exactly. And see, what I wanted to do was to make them into, I wanted to be able to make the blue avians into a point of ridicule, because that was the central point of that this cult was focusing around. And
right.
Cults are very vulnerable to ridicule, right? Who's going to want to associate with a leader if everybody in the tribe is laughing at him? You want to get away with the regular tribe and say he's, he's a lunatic. Anyway, though, so Corey Good comes up with this thing, and he's got this huge message that's all this religious mumbo jumbo. Bear in mind, he was a divinity student, so this stuff just rolls out of his head, as soon as he wakes up, kind of a thing, right? But my objection to all of this was that people don't understand reality. In reality, there is a way of looking at all beings and categorizing all beings that provides me with a reference point and a way of understanding their position in my common reality. Now, a lot of people have taxonomies for various different, genus, family, phylum, et cetera, down to species. Okay, so that's one way of looking at things, but my approach is different because of all of the bullshit encountered in the UFO world. I'm convinced there's a nugget of truth in there, but I think it's surrounded by 99% bullshit. How I wade through that is that I have a set of rules. And until there's a reality-based exception to void the rule, I will assume that that rule is valid. And I'm taking a lot of my rules from the things I find here on Earth. And so I know, for instance, that invertebrates on Earth are 85% of the entire biomass of life are invertebrates. Amoebas, bacteria, paramecium, insects, anything without a spine, okay? Creatures with spines only have 15% of that. So there's a bunch of stuff around that ratio and around that juxtaposition of information that makes me think that we were engineered, but that's a separate discussion for another time, just pursuing this idea. And so in the vertebrates, those critters with a spine, we can separate those any number of different ways: quadrupeds, bipedal, feathered, any of these number of different things. But the key criteria in my way of thinking is this something that totally is cryptic, totally hidden. You'll never ever actually see it, but it forms the framework from which I analyze all of this. And it's also what I call my taxonomy key for aliens. Because if you look at every creature you encounter with this particular key in mind, it will tell you where that being is and what it's, and even more important, especially from my perspective, in a face-to-face encounter, it'll tell you what their likely response is to certain kinds of activity. if you, for instance, just as an aside, if you were a space alien and you landed here and you didn't know anything at all about a dog, and you had a dog that was basically your same size, and you went on up there and grimaced and bared your teeth at the dog, thinking that dogs smiled, that dog would attack and bite you simply because you were not anticipating that result, and you had misinterpreted what was going on.
Yeah.
So my way of working with things makes this interpretation a lot easier. And what I key in on is the vagus nerve. You can't see it, okay? In our being, the vagus nerve connects our eyes, pineal gland, the glands under the ears, every one of our sense organs in the brain, the glands in the throat, all of those things that we would think of as associated with any of the chakras. It connects all of the organs, all of the main organs, except for the adrenals.
Mm.
And so this is a fully robust, what they call a polymorphic or a polyvagic biological identity. And so I can look at myself and I can say, okay, I can express all of these different emotions. I can relate to things. The vagus nerve allows me a really key factor here, okay? And that is that it gives me gives me two nervous systems, a sympathetic nervous system and a parasympathetic nervous system. One of these is under my control mentally, consciously, and it reaches in through the vagus nerve to all of those organs that it connects to, including the lungs. So in order for me to control my vagus nerve system as a yogi practitioner or whatever, I would start by learning to control my lung activity. That allows me to put pressure in terms of its respiration. So if I don't try and breathe, the vagus nerve and everything makes my lungs work for me. And I don't have to think about it. The lungs are on autopilot, right?
Right.
But if I wanted to take control of them, I can take control of them and I can force that signal, so to speak, back through the vagus nerve. And so if I'm really tense, I can take specific breaths and calm myself. This means I'm actually manipulating the hormones that are affecting my mind. Okay, if I'm all caught up in fear and I'm breathing, I can take a deep breath, center myself, and again, change the emotional state of my being through my hormones, because emotions are 100% connected with hormones. So since hormones are connected 100% with emotion, there is a complex of hormones that create all the phases of what we describe as love. There's a complex of hormones that create all of the phases that we describe as hate. And you can get any set of emotions you want through a complex of hormones that we've got. All of these can be, to the adept, controlled, first by breath. But if you get really good as a yogi, for instance, you can get into meditative state just by controlling your eyes. And so there's these things you can do to your body consciously that will alter that body's state and will alter your consciousness relative to that body. Now, the reason that this is key is that not all beings have vagus nerve structures the way we do. And this informs me that they won't feel emotions the way we do. They won't have control over their being the way we do. They won't react the way we do because they won't have these feedback loops of impression through the eyes, information to the vagus nerve, going down to the heart to speed me up for fighting or whatever, and so on. They won't have that. They will react entirely differently. So let's take one of the often touted other alien species, the reptilians. Okay, all reptiles on this planet have very, very simple vagus nerves. So simple that even when the vagus nerve is stimulated, it causes no change in heart rate. Okay, such a simple structure, these beings cannot feel emotions. They don't feel emotions the way we do. They don't even have fear or fight or flight the way we understand it. I'm of the opinion that the R complex, which sits at the base of the brain stem, our supposed reptilian brain, is woefully misnamed, has nothing to do with the reptilian consciousness at all, has nothing to do in DNA with any kind of a reptilian influence, and is simply misnamed. Yeah. Because the stupid psychologist or psychiatrist at the time constructed a model around it that was just totally wrong. Because if you look at reptiles, they don't have a fight, flight, or freeze response. Okay. They have a fight response until wounded, and then they flee. There's no reptile that's going to freeze in the face of danger like that. There's no reptile that's going to run away in the face of danger until they've been actually attacked and they understand in their little tiny brains that they can't win, and then they'll try and take off. So it's really so reptiles do not think. Okay, they certainly don't have emotions the way we do. And then their morphology is different than us. Okay, so humans are bilaterally symmetrical, and we can do things like stick our arms out to the side and grab things. Our peripheral vision is 120 degrees out like this. And a lot of that is connected to the vagus nerve because we had to climb. So we had to develop a particular shoulder structure and all of this. So getting back to the bullshit side of the secret space program, anybody that ever shows me a picture of a reptile with human-like shoulders being all puffy and, and pecs and lats and the whole thing, they have no idea what a reptile morphology, what its anatomy is like, because any reptile is only going to be restricted to actions in front of itself. Raptors, for instance, the dreaded raptors in Jurassic Park, can't reach out laterally. They can't bite laterally because their bodies have to move as a unit because of the way that they're structured. They can work cooperatively to some small degree, but they're not going to have any kind of emotional responses and all of this. Now, this is really key, okay, because in this taxonomy of space aliens, based on whether or not their vagus nerve is structured or whether they have one even, we could look at the blue avians. Avians are descendant from lizards. Chickens, especially here on the planet, but any bird on this planet, with the possible exception of the ostrich, does not have a vagus, a polybranching vagus structure. It's very narrow and so on. So chickens, any avian species, is incapable of love. They have basically a lizard response to things. Kill it, kill it, kill it, kill it, kill it until they're threatened, and then they run away. They can't cogitate, because without the feedback loop of being able to have hormonal responses come on in to change your thinking, and that comes through the vagus nerve, you do not have cognition. So it's my understanding that only beings with a fully advanced vagus nerve system could think, could have cognition. You may have robotic actions, and you may have beings that, are, well, look at it. All lizards, no lizard has theory of mind. All right, no lizard will ever try and train a child lizard. As soon as they lay the eggs, they're done with it.
Yeah.
And so they only operate on inbuilt instinct and their auto wiring. They can't learn the same way we do. And they certainly can't teach. They couldn't educate. They could never be involved in technology other than as the victim of it. And so what I've done is I've just divided the whole potential range of species that we might encounter supposedly in space based on how the vagus nerve structure is likely to be built into them in similar critters here on Earth. So I knew Corey Good's thing was full of bullshit when he said the blue space avians were here with a message of love. And it's like, dude, avians, they have no gestation hormones, which means they can never feel attachment to any progeny. So even if they're 6 foot high and they come from, some far distant star system, if they're avian in nature, they're going to lay an egg and go on about their business. They, again, won't have theory of mind. They won't be able to educate. They'll be imprinting beings. They'll have a very narrow range of activity, and that's all they'll be able to do. Yeah. Make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. Makes more sense. It sounds better than the other way. And honestly, I have never felt like, I know there's life out of obviously this world. Obviously, it only makes sense. It's ignorant not to think that. But I think just all the disinformation and all the things you hear just make it so, for me, I like facts. I like things that I could see, that I know. I mean, there's obviously truth to the astrology that I do. I can tell you who likes aliens and who doesn't. I can tell you who thinks they can see aliens and who doesn't. But have I ever seen an alien? No. So for me, it's like, okay, that makes more logical sense. But you hear all these things and you hear these stories from these people that say they get abducted by aliens and they come in with these, come back with these scratches and all these stories. And it's like, maybe their moon's just conjunct Rahu. That's how I look at it. Like, and they're thinking they may think they are, but maybe they're not. Okay.
Right, right.
Maybe they're, so that's how I look at it. But obviously that's not always the,
Okay, well, all right. So here's another side. First off, let's before we get finished with that, or maybe we can come back to it later.
yeah.
There's other animals on this planet that have highly advanced vagus nerve systems. Okay, so there's very intelligent creatures on this planet. The great apes, for instance, right? Chimpanzees and so on. They're nearly us in the vagus nerve system. But surprisingly, there's a lot of marine and amphibian animals that have completely polybranching vagus nerves, all of the whales, the dolphins. But here's the really kicker ones: octopi and cuttlefish. Cuttlefish are amazing predators, just like us. You never see them. They're down at the bottom of the ocean. They can flash and talk to each other through very complex light signatures, and they can hunt in packs, all of the kinds of stuff that go to being a predator. Their eyes are structured like predators, and their vagus nervous system is. So we might well encounter space aliens that would live in an aquatic environment and could truck around in space. And everybody says, oh, well, the people have been debating in these kind of things say, well, how could an aquatic species evolve and get fire? Because you're in the water, you can't have fire, right? Well, in our planet, they would not need to have fire because there's so many fumaroles down at the bottom of the ocean spewing out molten materials that if they were smart and had dexterity, they might indeed be able to have metallurgy based just on natural things occurring at the bottom of the planet in their environment, such as all of these huge giant fumaroles. This one at 3,000 degrees, that one at 700 degrees. You can do all kind of metallurgy between them. And of course, as an aquatic being, they might really understand salt chemistry and metallic chemistry, et cetera, et cetera. And so we don't know how intelligent they are, but they do have a vagus nervous system that that makes me think they could do cognition. So it's an interesting idea that you might run into other beings. And so, like I say, if I ran into, space chickens, it's like barbecue. Sorry, guys.
Somebody writes a comment in here. So much opinions, no information. I'd love to know. It is all opinions, in my opinion. I mean, that's what it is. This isn't something that there's like an encyclopedia on, aliens, and it's legit that you can follow, or there's a book that you can read. So,
well, if they want that kind of stuff, go on over and find a good cult leader and fall in with Corey Good. He'll tell you all kinds of stuff about aliens, 100%, which is untrue. But you're happy to fixate on that. Okay, right. Now, here, okay, so I'm a psychonaut, right? I've taken psychedelics. And so this has informed my opinion over the past 50 plus years. And I understand that there's a lot of discussion about aliens and very few people that have ever actually met aliens. And I'm including a lot of the contactees because they are not really meeting aliens. They may just be meeting some facet of their mind that's being triggered in a way that they can't really appreciate or have never encountered before. Mm-hmm. But if you were to take certain psychedelics, you can get to places where you can actually interact with minds are not human because of the interaction in that space. Now, this is a space that exists somewhere else in a way we can't define. Space like around here. Okay, we're using the same word, entirely different contexts and connotations and meaning. So when I say psychedelic space, people that have taken DMT or ayahuasca or mushrooms or mescaline, they'll understand what I'm saying, right? Because in the process of taking these things, so it's factual. Most people should not take psychedelics. There's two real good reasons for this, all right? It takes you weeks to reintegrate your personality back into something functional after a shamanic level psychedelic experience. Some people never get back. If you have a tendency towards any kind of a mental illness, it might trip you into a state that might take you years to reintegrate a personality. And you wouldn't have the wherewithal to think yourself out of that particular situation. So most people should not take psychedelics. In primitive societies, these events were led by people like myself, schizotypicals, schizophrenics, that had the genes to be able to handle it, even if we didn't understand what it was we were trying to handle at that time, okay? But psychedelics provide you with, the other reason not to take it is the dissolution. So the reason that people have bad trips on psychedelics is because of this initial phase of the what they call peaking within the psychedelic experience, where the chemical is just rushing through your body and is starting to the DMT is starting to alter your mind. You get this period of time, if you're taking a shamanic level of dose, where there is the dissolution of the body. Now, your body does not actually dissolve, but you certainly feel as though you're going to die. And there's nothing to stop you from dying. Your body may be literally, you look at it and you see atoms flying off into space. You're dissolving. And so the shamans of the previous ages call this the dissolution phase of these journeys. And this is the only way to do it. And a lot of people freak out and they cause themselves terrible harm because they actually think they will die. They've never been through it. They haven't been hardened to this terrible, terrible, terrible feeling that you go through and you come out the other side. Huxley describes it well in Doors of Perception, right? It's a very frightening thing. It can become familiar. It can become familiar, not comfortable, but going through it. So a lot of people at that stage, they induce themselves into a bad trip and then they never, ever, ever want to take the stuff again.
Yeah.
Okay, but if you go through this dissolution, when your body is dissolved, your consciousness is released into this space or place. That place appears to be reachable by other intelligences who may or may not be using psychedelics to get there. Okay, we don't know for sure, but a lot of them do use psychedelics or something within their environment that causes their body to react the same way as psychedelics cause us to react. And it is possible to gather at this place with what I've described as other minds. You know you're not talking to a human when you talk to these beings, okay? When you interact with them. And so in that place, you do meet aliens, but I can describe things there and describe experiences I've had there. But these are, unless you're going to be tripping and going into these same places and need a guide, this information is not material to us here now, because very likely none of the beings I've ever met would be anywhere capable of actually coming here physically. So I've actually sat down and I actually had to be told, could you please manifest your body? And when I looked at myself, I was just a sphere. And then I thought, oh, I see, how rude of me, right? And so I extruded legs and manifest what I sort of, as much as I could, what I looked like back on Earth in this experience. And I realized there that within this space in which other minds visited, who would be alien to me, there was a common level of courtesy that we all interacted with. And so very aggressive people here on Earth that have a trouble with society, that may be alcoholics, maybe raged kind of people that have some hormonal problems and so on, will describe to you, after they've had mushroom experiences and so on, going to this other place where they had to be polite. And so it's their words on this central meeting ground that you can get to with consciousness. In there, I can describe to you aliens, and some of them were quite open and quite forthcoming to me about what they looked like and how their bodies worked and the circumstances that they lived in and so on. Others are very closed, and it just had to do with the nature of the being itself. Many of them didn't have fear of me or anything while I was there. And they were aware of humans because they'd encountered them over a number of centuries or years in their life. Who knows what their relationship to time was. And so they weren't particularly anti-human or anything. And they knew of some of our peculiarities. And so I can tell you, factual kind of things. Like, I have never seen it described I think I've described it on the internet, but I met this being when he manifested his body. He was basically a hominid, but he had the very interesting characteristic of having his emotions float as iridescent colors about a quarter of an inch or so over his skin, like a very sort of a smoky aura. And he tells me then there's no word. I mean, there are words, but there's no speech. Okay. It's all mind to mind communication. And he tells me about where he comes from, which is nowhere near here in our understanding of galaxies. Might not even be in our galaxy as far as I know, but he tells me in his reality that's how they communicate with each other. They don't use speech. So if they want to, they can flash themselves into a color and get all these nuances and stuff in their aura right through their clothing, because this stuff rides up over the top of their skin. I met mantid beings there, okay, who confirmed to me. Now the guy with the emotions, he told me all kinds of stuff about language, communications, because he was all about communications. Their whole body, their whole physical being was all about communicating constantly, because there were just lights moving all the time. But he told me about all of these kind of things, right? And other things. And it's a trading session. They want to talk to you to learn new stuff. Psychonauts are the same everywhere. If you're a shaman and you bust through there, you're driven by needs here on your planet. And then once you're there, the exploration, the shock of the new, as I call it, is what drives everybody that ends up there. And I once talked to these things that could be described as being insects or mantids. And they were the ones who confirmed to me that my supposition about the vagus nerve was correct, because insects have no vagus nerve. And so I had this discussion with one of them once, and he said, no, that if there was some danger, mortal danger to me that was not going to impact him, he may or may not warn me or save me or alert me based on whether or not his brain calculated in that instance any value to him for doing that. So he had no concept of the idea of compassion. He had no concept of the idea of emotions as we would understand it. As I describe them, they're basically benign, very low level of a life form in terms of their emotional constituent, but very high cognition without a vagus nervous system. And I never went back and met them to find out how that occurred. That was actually my plan. The mantid, right.
Wow, interesting.
And it's the same mantid that's described by a lot of people that go into ayahuasca journeys. Okay, and I've never done ayahuasca. It was just not part of the psychedelic milieu that I came up in. Each one of them, by the way, is different. Okay, so psychedelics was described by this one being that I met there that was very closed about what it actually was, and it simply presented itself as basically like a black triangle, right? It really, you couldn't see anything, but you were communicating with it. And psychedelics, each one has a very different function, and each one of the natural ones. I'm of the opinion as they are that LSD doesn't get you there. You can't do a shamanic journey with an LSD trip. Okay, that there's some constituent chemical that's missing in the mix of the chemical, and it just doesn't get you there. It's a huge psychedelic. You have all of these various other benefits, but it does not transport you the way mescaline, psilocybin, peyote, and some of these other herbal kind of products do. But each one of them is a different technology. So if you wanted to hop right in and meet with people and be in a very in this environment, you would use mescaline, derived from peyote plants, or use the peyote itself. If you want to be able to be, let's say, active, you would use some form of the psilocybin mushrooms. The difference basically is that different parts of your mind are affected. And so when you have a mescaline experience, you go to this environment and you bring back with you thoughts and a residue in your brain that is affected by that experience. So, but the same thing is true of psilocybin. You go into psilocybin, you have a different experience, and you have a different, a slight difference of awareness of perception of the environment when you're doing, and so much more awareness of the environment, what's going on, the devices, everything that's around. Whereas with mescaline, it's the personalities. Basically, it's the big difference, right? And in the case of, and they're actually antipodal in terms of the two chemicals. So when you do psilocybin, it affects the linguistic center of your brain. So it's not all about communication the way mescaline is, but it is, the residue affects the linguistic center of your brain and how you deal with words and symbols and so on. With mescaline, let's just describe it as the mathematic or mechanical side of your brain, even though when you're on the mescaline trip, you couldn't think numbers if you tried, and you're 100% about linguistics and communication and expressing the emotions and all of this sort of thing. So these are real aliens in my view. I've met aliens well, I was corporeal, but my corporeality was not necessarily involved. Okay, so how do we characterize that kind of an experience? It's not like someone saying that they've been abducted and people actually, or thingies actually touched them and drew them through a wall. It's not like Corey Good saying that he's been popped into a blue bubble and floated out of the house and going to Antarctica.
Yeah, right. When I heard that, it's just so hard. I'm not saying not to discredit. Maybe he just took some LSD trips. What if he did that and then he got a little confused, right? Maybe he had
Right.
a confusion. All right, that's what I'm going to go with. So I just think sometimes it can just be a little. Could it be just somebody with a mental disorder that says they see this, or somebody that has?
There you go. Okay, so here's the thing. Religions for humans are created by people like myself, schizotypicals. We're less than 2% of any population at any given time. We have many of the characteristics of schizophrenics, but we don't have all of the expressions at the same time. So my brother was a full-on schizophrenic. He had to be isolated from society, totally incapable of being, once he got into a certain stage of it, from that point on, he was non-functional. Schizophrenics all over the planet are that way. They are that way, by the way, because of this substance called adrenochrome. Okay. Adrenochrome is the oxidized form of adrenaline. So everybody produces adrenochrome to some degree. It whacks you out of your skull. It drives every thought. It alters how you perceive reality. It changes neural pathways. It affects you at ways that you're incapable of perceiving when you're under its influence. And it's horrifically deadly in the sense that your mind does not recover from adrenochrome. Okay. But in my case, I'm a schizotypical, so I can have episodic adrenochrome incidents, but I'm not controlled by it. But religions are created by people like myself that see visions. They see those visions because of that adrenochrome. But they're high functioning schizotypicals. They're not totally excluded. They live on the side of the village and so forth, and they frequently take psychedelics and these kind of substances just to try and manage their own interaction with this horror that is adrenochrome. All right. And a full-fledged schizophrenic can't think well enough to be able to try and think their way out of that situation. And so that's really the difference. They've got these big genes active. But religions are created by us. All right. The idea of Moses seeing the burning bush and hearing voices from it. Well, duh, dude, get your vitamin B levels up and a lot of that'll go away. And that's the way it is. You've got a lot of these shaman and so forth that'll tell you exactly the same thing I'm telling you. And they're always living at the side of the village and so on. Yeah. They've actually formalized this. Psychologists have actually scoped it out and said religions are created by such people. And thereafter, we get to the point where you have to start saying, well, what's going on here relative to mental illness? Okay, so my brother could never have been a good psychonaut. The adrenochrome and the extra psychedelics would have, totally fried him out. There's all different kinds of biochemical problems that we have in our bodies that are manifest through our outward behavior. As everybody knows, if you've got something sagging in terms of your blood sugar around 3 p.m. and you're just bitchy as hell, get out of my way, and they make commercials out of that kind of behavior. And these are more gross signs of a larger level of deprivation, but subtle signs can cause and twist your thoughts and your representation in your own mind of what you think you've just been through.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's sometimes you wonder about that, like in a logical way. I mean, but okay, so what do you think about like the elongated skulls and stuff that they found?
Oh, sure. 100% factual, undoubtedly pre-Ice Age civilizations. They found 40,000 of things in Peru. Reputedly, the Masons in the United States, just on the East Coast, destroyed over 100,000 of them. Okay, for the Smithsonian, because it couldn't store them anymore. There was no point in any of this. They find them all around the planet. So I'm quite convinced that that our description of our own history is bogus, and I don't buy anything from academia. And so if I like, for instance, I'm watching Joe Rogan. I'm partial to Joe Rogan. He's a funny guy. and he gets some really good thinkers on there sometimes. And I'm instantly pissed off when I hear these guys make statements that don't take into account that the line they've been told may not be true. And so you'll hear psychologists saying, 60,000 years ago, our intelligence jumped up. And it's like, no, guys, we've been around for a couple of million years. And so if we can't reconcile all of these paradigms, then all of academia is based at some level on big steaming piles of bullshit that they swear are 100% true. And that's why we are at this point in history now where we've got science as the religion, and it has to be officially approved science. Otherwise you're a heretic. So if you don't buy into the global warming, you're a heretic. You've got to go. We can't have anything, shaking our paradigm like facts. So you've got to be very careful about how you approach this, because they're now making a religion out of science that's based on insupportable paradigm. Now, the scientific method and so on is valid, but with science being officially paid for and officially validated and all of this kind of stuff, it's a political tool anymore, and it's a political religion. And now, so getting back to the alien thing on this, they're not about to tell us if there's aliens. And we may indeed be having abduction events. And we may indeed be having abduction events by non-terrestrial beings. And we'll never know about it from anything in the way of disclosure. They can't afford to come on out and say this. This is one of the reasons that they can't, by the way, is the liability. If it ever came out that there was one factual case of a person that was abducted in the middle of the night and hauled out through their wall and implants put in or whatever the hell, then that person is able to sue based on the denial of all of these various different rights that you should have from your government, and that's what the government keeps saying as they're in the movies anyway, and in the books and so forth, as their excuse for not doing disclosure. It's twofold. They've killed a lot of people and nobody wants to go to jail for killing people to keep the secrecy going. And then they also say we can't afford to put this information out there because of the liability, not because they're afraid of actually being sued, but because of the liability in our minds. What good is the government if the Air Force can't protect me from space aliens? Why should I pay $55 bazillion for that new fancy airplane that they want? Screw that. I'm going to buy my own weapons and sit here all, hunkered down, ready to blow them to shit.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. So that's like kind of, so you think there's a possibility then that sometimes maybe there's a somewhat of a possibility that aliens come down here, could do an abduction. Maybe it's a possibility.
Can't rule it out.
Yeah.
Okay. And because it's in the literature the way it is, there may have been some that have happened in the past. It would be expected to occur. Now, this is the ant theory. Okay. The ant theory goes like this. I'm not about driving. Okay. So I'm driving through the desert. I'm not going to pull off to the side of the road and have a conversation with an anthill. Right. And that's how aliens may indeed see us.
Yeah.
And if that's the case, I may just on the whim, or because it's I'm an insectologist, right? I may just stop at that anthill, snatch some of the buggers up in an abduction, throw them into a jar and drive off. And that anthill is, oh my God, aliens abducted Sam, he's gone. And that's the way that we would be treated. There's
right.
No reason for them to, and all of the bullshit coming out of the bullshit side of the UFO world about, aliens being love and light and having all of these emotions and trying to help us out and help us with ascension and all of that kind of stuff. It's like, man, how delusional can you get? So I'm a practical fellow simply because I know I have a warped mind. I know my thinking is affected by my schizotypical genetics, right? And so I've had to proceed very logically to keep myself from falling into traps that affected my brother and other schizophrenics. And that is to believe shit. So I actively don't believe anything. Okay. Right. But I do have some sound knowledge. And that is, universe is suffering. World is dangerous. It's fucking stupid to treat either of those things as not true. And so the dangerous world means that I can't assume any space alien I'm going to meet is benevolent in any way, shape, or form. And I must assume as a rational being that they've got their own agenda. I also must assume that I don't probably fit very high on that agenda. And so I find all of these other woo-woo people um, dangerous because they could create mindsets that I think are not wise in the way that universe has shown me. The planet is not, it's not as dangerous among ourselves as it used to be, 50 years ago or 100 years ago, but it's still a very dangerous planet. And and it's also, as we expand out into space, going to get ever so much more dangerous. And so I do sailing and I go out on a sailboat. I am aware that any action on the water is 35% more likely to result in an accident just because I'm on the water. And so I take precautions. I wear the right shoes. I have good clothing. I know where the handholds are. I know the little rule, one hand for yourself, one hand for your work, that kind of thing. And so you do these metrics in order that you don't have to think about it and you can shrink down the risks so they're manageable, and sailing becomes a pleasurable kind of a thing. And so when I get my little floaty triangle and I go off and do my space pirating, I'll have a little checklist, oh, it's going to be this kind of alien. Okay, then we need this kind of weapons or whatever, right? And so, but these things will be inculcated as I go forward, and we're not seeing that in the UFO community. It's all this bogus ascension stuff, all of this as I say, the bullshit side of things, right? These people have no evidentiary support for anything they're doing. And beyond that, they don't have any strategic or tactical or analytical paradigm in which they're operating.
Right.
So let's look at channeling. Okay, so in our discussion here of consciousness, taking drugs, going to some other place, which may not actually be a physical place, but it doesn't matter. It's a sense of place, or you're mentally whacked out on something internal to your biochemistry and you have visions and experiences. Where does channeling fit in with that, right? What is channeling relative to our consciousness? Are you in fact encountering alien beings? Well, here's something that I can tell you, that if I analyze things based on my taxonomy of alien beings, I see that there's humans, there's dolphins, there's whales, there's great apes. We all think over here. There's reptiles. Reptiles react. Okay, that's all they can do is react. They can't cogitate, they can't think. There's a lot of marine animals that are like that. Sharks, for instance. Sharks can't cogitate. They don't have a vagus nerve system. Most fish don't have a vagus nerve system. Not like we have here. Insects have none. So, Simon Parkes saying he's been raised by mantids. Mantids could care less. They would just leave a baby there to die in its own waste of starvation because they were off thinking about something. They have no compassion. So it just doesn't happen. And we know that jellyfish and so on. But here's the deal. There's also a category of beings that we can call ephemerals, okay? Non-corporeal. So when I was at that other place talking with these other beings, they were at that point corporeal in their own environment, but where we were in that shared reality, they were not corporeal, as I was not corporeal. This implies that non-corporeal beings are all around us, okay? That we live in a world of thought, a universe of thought, if you will. So if we follow that line of thinking, then here's what channeling is. Channeling is opening yourself up to an external source of input. When that occurs, you're contacting something that is alien to your very basic core, to who you are. It's not alien in the sense of, reptilians or grays or blue space chickens, but it is nonetheless alien. The problem with channeling, though, is the same with all other contacts with alien beings. Now, bear in mind, none of the ephemerals have vagus nervous systems. Okay, that means we cannot judge their motivation, or anything about them based on ourselves, which means you're really out there feeling around in the dark when you're dealing with this kind of stuff, okay? And so the caution is, and the traditions that I come up from, is that you don't do channeling ever. And the reason you don't do channeling ever is not necessarily for the damage it's going to cause to you in this life, but for the sure and certain damage that it causes you in your next life. Because my brother is schizophrenic because he was channeling in previous lives. The thing about channeling is that it does two things, okay? Or three things. You can't judge what is reality with channeling. If you actually are able to contact another being and you feel that being in your spirit, what you're actually feeling is going to feed you information, but you have no way to validate any of it. So David Wilcock with his law of one channeling. It's like, fine, guys, I'm glad you did all of that Jesus mumbo jumbo before you got into your channeling mode and opened yourself up to whatever the hell you were talking to. But the Jesus mumbo jumbo does not affect that whatever the hell you were talking to at all. And you're deluding yourself, and you're actually even deluding yourself further because you think that Jesus mumbo jumbo ensured that you were only talking to good aliens or good spirits or good entities. And nothing could be further from the truth. And at a practical level, okay, at a practical level, what is there for an entity? Why should they want to contact you? Not to help you. I mean, their agenda is their own. They're out here floating around on their own. Why the hell should they give a rat's ass about any of us? Well, one of the things you can think about is maybe they get something from us. And this is the truth of the matter. That when you see channelers, I know this because I can see auras. If I get my ki all pumped up, like in Aikido sessions, I will see auras on people under fluorescent lights. Fluorescent lights seem to really bring it out. And I've actually seen channelers under fluorescent lights. I was coming out of a big Aikido session at Evergreen State College. I was walking down down to the first floor of the gym building and had to walk the entire length of the gym building. And there was this other open room, and there was all these people in there, and there was this person channeling. And so I just stood by the door to watch as I was walking out. Now, I had been doing maybe 2 hours of Aikido, maybe 2.5 hours. And you would do the ki exercises, the breathing exercises ahead of that. So maybe 3 hours involvement, and I'm just pumped with the ki, you know. I mean, I could see auras on a rock at that stage. But anyway, I was able to see that this person that was actually the channeler had their aura out and open, and it indeed had an external source of an aura that was not, most auras hover around you, right? They take the shape of your body in a more or less sense. This was off as this funnel thing off the top of their head. And it's like, whoa, I'm really freaked out. And then I saw what was going on, that funnel thing reached out and was trying to get into everybody else in that room. And it was drawing energy into itself. And so so basically the description of what channeling is something selling you a bill of goods, telling you any damn thing you want to hear in your brain so that it can suck energy out of you. And what it tries to do is to connect to the vagus nerve and suck out through there. Now, when this happens, the damage in this life is interesting because they are actually able to get in through the vagus nerve and extract energy out of your cells, out of the mitochondria of your cells. And a good channeler, when they're all done after a couple of hours session, you see that they get sweaty and their eyes glaze over. Some of them will go into low blood sugar, they're shaky, they don't get up all robust and so on. They've actually been drained by the experience. And that draining is interesting because what's happening is it's hitting their adrenal system heavy because because all of the energy that your body is creating to make your heart work and your lungs work and your brain function, is some of it is being sucked out by this entity for its own purpose. Because while it's channeling from you, it has life. It has some contact with the corporeal world. And so it's getting some energy out of you, and it's sort of like an energy fish, like a parasite. And anyway, so I saw this going on, and I saw it trying to get into all of these other people, and I was a little bit weirded out. So I did this big Aikido smacking of the hands in a particular way, and everybody gets all startled, and it broke the spell, and the thing floated off. And the channeler was like exhausted. It was like, being interrupted in the middle of sex or something. That guy was really pissed, and it was just very negative from that point on. But I actually saw that funnel thing broke off when their attention was all shifted back around to me. So I learned a great deal then. Yeah. Plus, that was like brown belt stage. I was ready to take them on anyway. So,
right. Well, that's an interesting point, because when I was, I don't know if you knew this, but I was very Christian as a child, like on my own. So I went to a Christian school, and I used to try to speak in tongues, right? And that when they get in that zone and they start doing that, and they're like speaking it, I used to come home and cry that I couldn't speak in tongues. Okay. And this is me at like 13, 14, 15. And this is because I come home, I write Heidi Loves Jesus on the walls. All right. And just be like, why can't I speak in tongues? Blah, blah, blah. But what you just said right there, and after talking to Jeff, like Jeff, who is the Christian whistleblower, who was an ordained minister, and said it's basically channeling, and it's like you just don't know where it's coming from, which makes so much sense. That's what they're doing, and they're sucking in that crowd, blasting it out to the whole church, trying to get you to get sucked into this system. And I wasn't having it. My mind was like, absolutely not, bitch. You're sitting this one out, and I would get so upset though. And, it's like. But sometimes
that was you wanted to belong. You wanted to be part of the group and stuff. Okay, so as a schizophrenic, I've never been part of any group, right? People can't stand to be around me for various different kinds of reasons. And it allows me to observe this kind of behavior and get really nitpicky about it and think about it. But you're quite correct. You were never, ever cut out for that sort of thing. Your mind is structured entirely different. But here's something, okay? This is actually the division line between magic and sorcery. Okay, sorcerers never get screwed around with channeling. It's a low level art. It leads to this dead end. You notice that we've never, in all of our millions of years of being on this planet, and millions of, even if we just accepted academia, in the last 40,000 years, has channeling ever produced anything worthwhile other than regular old religious mumbo jumbo that was already in your head before you did that? Has channeling Edgar Casey, any of these guys, right? It's just a hit or miss. It's statistically probable that he would say certain things that would be taken in and assumed to be accurate and so on, and you get a feedback loop going. But channeling is never, except in one particular instance that we're aware of, channeling has never produced diagrams for any kind of a machine. It's never given us any kind of history that we didn't know about, or anything we did not know about going into the channeling session. All it did was this emotional pump and dump kind of thing. So
wait, speaking of that though, did you hear when they said on that video, they said that a channeler gave the Nazis
exactly. That was just what I was going to bring up. Okay.
Yeah.
This is okay. So now there's the Thule Society, right? Okay. So Germany goes through all of this stuff. And then in 1933, the world Jewry from Israel, from the Holy Land, declared war on Germany before Hitler got in. All Jews declared war on Germany. From that point on, there was no longer a necessity or a link between the German people and the previous structure of religion. And the social order at that time tried to take them back even further. So instead of inventing a new state religion the way the Henry VIII did when the old religion became inconvenient, he created Church of England and off they went. What the Germans tried to do was to jump back to a previous religion, which was all of this mystical stuff. And in that, they also had the Thule Society, which had a practicing technology. That's how they thought of it, of a particular kind of channeling. Now, here's the interesting part of this. We've had 3 instances where channelers have attempted to produce devices or drawings for us, okay? The one was the Thule Society with the Germans, and they went absolute batshit and built a lot of stuff from it. The other one was with, what's his name? Bashar, okay? And he produced some kind of drawings and stuff which were just absolutely bogus and totally a waste of time for everybody. And then there's this Keisha guy, okay, out of Iran, a Persian. And he produced a bunch of drawings that were all channeled and says this technology is free energy and all of this kind of stuff. Again, a waste of time, highly complex and a waste of time. Part of the problem with all of this, including the channeling, is that these entities reach into your mind. They're only finding stuff in your mind to feed back to you. They're not bringing anything in there, right? But anything that is within your mind, they can open up and stir up, reconnect, and present back to you to raise the hormone levels the way they want. So if you think as a channeler, you're getting great stuff out of them that you're going to bring back in this channeling session, like hard science or something, they're only telling you stuff in order to raise the hormonal level to suck more energy out of you. And then when the channeling session ends, you'll find that in fact, none of it is valid. Yeah. The exception to this, though, appears to have been the Germans. Now, there's a lot of people that dispute that the Germans had any floating Hannibal spaceships or any of this kind of stuff, right? But on the other hand, while there's not a preponderance of evidence, there is evidence that there was some weird stuff going on. So when I was in southern Germany, I got to wander through the Black Forest. And at that time in the way early 60s, there were still all kinds of bunkers and all of these kind of things.
Yeah.
There was this one underground area that was connected with the whole place was riddled with cement tunnels and all different kinds of stuff. And there was this one area that had been involved with the manufacture of one of the reputed spaceships. Okay. What made this thing really interesting was it was an odd building to observe as a kid because it's very large. So it was underground, but it was maybe only 40 feet of earth on top of it. And it was basically a giant airplane hangar made out of cement. And you had to have your own flashlights and this sort of thing to explore. But if you got enough people in there with you, and you had at the time, there were only these little military flashlights, but I had this friend of mine that had a big one that took these giant dry cells. And you could see up to the ceiling, and you could see that the ceiling had been repeatedly bashed by stuff. Okay. And that there were chains on the floor. So whatever it was, and basically it's empty. There's dust, there's, destroyed discs, all different kinds of stuff, bits of paper for us to look at, and stamps, old German stamps, which were highly prized at the time. So you could sell those. And basically as a kid, that's what we were after, was souvenirs, right? But while I was down there, I just wondered what the hell would cause the damage on the inside of this airplane hangar ceiling. And whatever it was not regular kind of damage. It wasn't like people sitting here shooting. It wasn't pockmarked or anything. And there were these giant chains that were bolted to the floor periodically throughout this entire big area, as though they were securing something down. So it may well have been that they figured out how to do anti-gravity, but really didn't control it well. Plus, this is near a major area for 2 electrical plants, and there was copper wiring in there like I'd never seen. So I was maybe, I don't know how tall I would have been there, somewhere maybe between 4 and 5 feet. And the size of the copper coming in there was almost up to my knee. So we could say it was maybe 18 inches around. Wow. Copper wires. So they were bringing in massive amounts of electricity. Absolutely incredible. So something was going on. And so I think maybe the Germans, with all of the other, evidence that you can actually find, documentation and so on, were doing something. But let's kick way back to your earlier question about the conical skull people. Okay. We see those all over South America. They had 40,000 of the cone heads they discovered in Peru. They found in big caves of their skeletons and all of this. What's interesting to me was when I was in Europe in the 60s, schools and parents were always hauling kids into museums, like we gave a rat's ass, right? And so they'd have to go and look at all these damn pictures. And at that age, you actually keyed in on physical abnormalities. And it was just interesting to me how many cone heads were represented as royalty. Yeah. And frequently the cone heads were female. So you would see the whole female line of some particular branch of the Habsburg family, right, in Germany. And you'd go back into the 1300s, there's a portrait, 1400s, all the portraits, mainly of the women. And all of the women shared the cone head. They also were bald. They all had some kind of head wrap to disguise that they were bald. Some of them were really weird because they had this like gossamer sort of a thing around their head and then like one tuft of hair sticking out. And it's like, oh yeah, that's real attractive, guys. But anyway, so here they were touting their ancestry connected to the cone heads and showing that they were cone heads as well in terms of these lines of all of the aristocrats. Right. And it was a big shock to me when I hit Europe because the school system was run by the Brits, which means we spent an inordinate amount of time on the royals. I got to the point where just going into the school, I would want to puke when they start talking about the next line of the royals you were supposed to know. And I failed all of those classes. Okay. The only reason I got out of any of those schools was I was really good at math and science, and because you didn't have to like the subject right. matter, but I actually felt better about, sodium chloride than I did about any of these strange kings. Right?
Oh, that's so funny. Isn't
But
it amazing how your brain rejects it though, like that? I mean, that's for like a conscious person or somebody that's like more aware of things, I think. Because I was the worst student. I mean, what I was good at was paying people and figuring out how to get out of school without me doing it. Okay. I was like the master of manipulation. And I had no interest whatsoever. Like I just wanted to figure it out like a business. Like, how can I get out of this thing without doing any of this work? So, and I was like paying people on the side, left and right. I mean, it was crazy until I did criminal justice. Different story. I loved it. But until something you're fascinated.
You were just too bored. Exactly.
Yeah. It was like, no, not happening. That's funny.
I did the other approach. Okay. I buried myself in languages, mathematics, this kind of thing. I came back to the United States from I was able to graduate high school early because of all of the stuff that I had in Europe. I came back to the United States to go into high school, and I'd already had calculus. And in that particular school system I was in, I wouldn't have gotten calculus until I'd gotten out of high school, or maybe I could take it into senior studies. So I just burned up and just accumulated all different kinds of credits in all these science courses. And then I also took law, and I thought, damn, law is good. I took a year of torts and contracts, arguing the nuances of the contracts and so on. Yeah, I agree with you. The school system, and the school system is created by the cone heads for the people that are going to have to support the cone heads, right? And these days, our cone heads are not quite as evident as in the past because they've interbred with us, and the size of the skull has reduced.
So is that what you think happened?
Mm-hmm. I think that the cone heads are what everybody calls like Anunnaki, and those kind of guys. They're interesting because the structure of the brain would suggest that they had another sense. Okay, the structure of the cranium. Okay, so in my world, there's only 4 senses. All right, they're all within the cranium, and a sense is defined by a sense organ. A sense organ is a subsystem in a computer kind of a sense, and it provides you with a completely rendered output. So I have taste buds, but I don't actually taste anything. I get the flavor that is provided by the taste buds after it's done all of the stuff. I never really smell the actual constituents of the aroma. I get the combined thing and presented to me. I don't feel my nose smelling. I don't really feel my tongue tasting, and I certainly don't feel the light going into my eyes that renders the visual image. These are all subsystems. They present me with a complete task. The subsystem itself can be damaged, and that whole level of functionality is taken away from me. That's really the definition of a sense, right? And so, for instance, the sensation of touch is not a sense. There's no sense organ for the touch there. Yes, there's nerves in there. There's myelinated nerves. That's another issue with vagus nerve, by the way. The vagus nerve system is a particular kind of a nerve that has a sheath around it, so it's protected like an insulated wire. Reptiles don't have this. Anytime a reptile actually has activity that engages it and it does something, its little tiny vagus nerve system is not involved. The unmyelinated, uninsulated nerve system within the reptile takes over, and it goes off and does its thing. Same thing is true of chickens and all these other reptile relatives. So I can tell you that they're not responding on a hormonal level. It's entirely electrical, right? Chickens may have hormones, but that, at a slightly different level. Anyway, though,
what about a fox? Sorry, not to
sure. No, foxes, dogs, cats, they're complete. Okay. So they actually have cognition. Okay. They can sit and reason. They don't have theory of mind, but they can't, or rather they could not elucidate theory of mind, but they know how to teach young. So you can see a fox teach the kittens or the dog teach the puppies. Don't do that. Stay away from there, get back and growl when they're doing something wrong. That's instruction. Never see a lizard or a chicken do that for their young.
Right.
Okay.
If they're young, eat them.
Exactly. If they get out of line, that's it.
Right.
So you see that the structure of the aliens that have been presented to us is entirely bogus, as is presented by the UFO world. And, we're in a big state of flux at the moment. You know this as well as anybody, that we're moving into the age of Aquarius. The nature of the underlying metaphor for life will change. Okay, it won't be schooling like in the age of Pisces. It'll be much more fragmented, but also much richer because we'll all have availability of knowledge at a higher level. So that being the case, it's like, well, um, we have astrology that's backing up where we are. Our whole concept of the relationship of how we're doing things is changing. So it's sort of a good time to get rid of all of the blue chicken shit. The
And
blue
there's a lot of
space.
it out there right now.
Oh, it's deep. It's deep. Every time you go anywhere, you got to just kick your way through it. Yeah.
And it's about everything. Where now it's almost like everything is just so twisted. It's like and then people get so pissed off. Like, for instance, the flat earth. Okay. I mean, it's so like it's such something that people shouldn't be flipping out at each other for. It's like these topics that have been thrown out there that, there's questionable information about all of it. It's like everything. You're just, even the Q stuff, it's getting like violent. It's crazy. I mean,
it's cult-like behavior, but let me point out to you that in my way of thinking, the reason we have that now at this particular time at the level of intensity that we have is due to these energies from space. The sun is actually reduced and more energy is coming around it. More cosmic energy is coming around it and impacting us. And it's actually impacting us through our vagus nervous system, which is a giant hormonal antenna. Okay, the vagus nervous system has to be looked at as sort of like all kinds of tendrils that go throughout your entire body and connect all these organs and stuff. If you were to flatten it out, you'd have several sheets of plywood that you could spread it out over. And so it's a big antenna for energies from space. One could hypothesize that this is universe's way of helping us to evolve. Okay, and so this is the underlying core of the whole ascension bullshit and Corey Good's flash from the sun bullshit, right? They say, and David Wilcock, oh, you're going to ascend. One day you'll be sitting there having coffee, the sun will flash, and the next thing you know, you're going to be in fifth density. Never mind, they can't describe this fifth density. They have no description for the mechanism that this is going to happen or what's going to be like, et cetera, et cetera. But nonetheless, at its core, we do have this thing of strange energies that are coming in, and we're all feeling it. Everybody's upset globally. Everybody's upset globally about stuff that we shouldn't be upset about. Everybody's at loggerheads because our hormonal antenna is picking this up and is strengthening certain hormonal responses, making us, and our brains, therefore, they've got the hormones, they just have to fix on something to cement that hormone too. Mm-hmm. And so you're angry. Well, you're angry at them because they're not like you. They don't think what you think, right? But you're not really angry because they don't think what you think. You're angry because your antenna has picked up these energies from space because universe wants a bunch of us to be angry now. Now, in my way of thinking, it's like, okay, are we going to do World War I, World War II again because we're so angry? The same energies from space issue was affecting people at that time in a slightly different way. We have it differently here. So let me throw out a wild ass hypothesis here, okay? Really strange one. Say that we could express this the way that Corey Good and the Ascension folks think about it. All right? Everybody's saying, oh, there's a great awakening in humanity. There's, the energies from universe are causing us all to awaken and so on. What if we accept that indeed there are strange energies from universe and they're affecting all of us? It does not necessarily mean that the entire planet of humanity is going to ascend or is going to change or is going to be aware that they're being influenced by these energies. It is my hypothesis that only the schizotypicals will know. We're the only ones being affected by this. We can feel ourselves being affected by this. Those of us that have reached the same conclusions I have reached are able to say, oh, I'm being affected by it. I'm going to stand away from it and just let it pass through me. Whereas everybody else around me is in a roiling rage fighting each other. I can be quite calm and say, I need not allow these energies to affect myself, but I feel them, whereas others don't feel those energies because they're not schizotypical. Religion comes from schizotypical people. We would invent the next religion from this particular time and in our reality as these energies affect us and as they go through our society. So I may be looking at a society that's going to tear itself to shit, and I need not involve myself in it. So my task in these next few years is to guide myself through the chaos that will erupt. And maybe universe will provide a few schizotypicals like myself enough of a voice to be able to get it to the rest of the people so that they'll be able to say, maybe I'm irritated as all hell and I shouldn't be slapping my kid. And maybe I'm not irritated at my kid. Maybe I'm actually irritated because of strange energies from space. And I really ought to be under a metal hat.
Right. No, it's true. And even like, okay, so the moon, I think, is just, did you hear that China said that they were going to launch a moon up to space, a new moon for, okay, so that just makes me think about the moon, right? It's like, what the hell's going on with the moon? What is it? Is it a port up there? Are they controlling something up there? Are there people up there? Are people up there? Is there an aircraft? So you have to wonder about this and are they messing with our emotions? So even if astrology is controlled, like for instance, they're still using it. I don't care how it's working. It's working. My astrology is working. But I do feel like maybe I look at it this way, where they could be using it to control us too. So if you know it and you're in the system, you can watch out for these things.
Correct. And you could ride particular large waves to greater prominence and so on. Okay. And it is these exact same conditions, whether or not there was a conspiracy behind it, that brings out people like Temujin, who we think of as Genghis Khan, right? The first of the great kings. Okay, so he rode a wave because they were in the same exact kind of circumstances we are now relative to the strange energies from space. A lot of these mass movement of humans throughout the planet have happened because we were at a similar point in space astrologically, right? Relative to our trip around the galaxy. We weave up and down in a sinusoidal pattern. This affects how we're getting our astrology. And every so often we come back into these periods where maybe it's at the peak of our sinusoidal pattern relative to the edge of the galaxy. When we reach up to the peak, maybe we don't get enough, or we get too much energy or something. It changes. You get mass migrations, you get Genghis Khan going and killing a quarter of all of the humans on the planet. And by the way, if you read into the literature that they left, the Mongols said that was because he was determined to get rid of the aliens who were hiding in human bodies. And so they would get to the idea, oh, that particular Muslim town over there with 30,000 people has got some aliens in it. They just kill everybody, because he was convinced that this was the case. So who knows what affected his mind, right? But we know that it was affected by these strange energies from space. And so we find certain typical patterns of things occur when these energies from space also coincide. And we're at one of those positions right now. So we may well be visited by space aliens, but there's a couple of conditions we have to understand. Space is not vacuum. The only place that there is vacuum is behind the suns as they drag through the interstellar media. The interstellar media is denser in some spots than others. So it's not, you can't run a spaceship through it. It'd be like trying to take the USS Enterprise and push it through sand. Okay, there's going to be those kind of frictions and stuff that will occur. You'd always be in a bubble of ionized gas, the electricity and everything. So it doesn't make sense to travel that way. So if anybody has come here, they've done it in where they've traveled outside of time, which means they've got a particular kind of technology. And then we get into the whole other aspects of what those beings are and what it takes to travel through time or beyond time, because it's actually outside of time. And it's just like you're here and then you're there and no time has elapsed. That causes changes that really warps out humans. Now, in some of these things I know, or I suspect are valid. Okay, so there's a line of reasoning through UFO bullshit world that says that these people in Vandenberg Air Force Base in California on I think it was a spring afternoon, were treated to a trip in a spaceship, a bunch of scientists. And they were going to take them from one spot at Vandenberg way the hell into Death Valley. When they got there, they were told that to get out of the spaceship and put something in your pockets that you might find there. Don't bring back anything that was alive. no plant material or anything, but rocks or sand or something. Because and then you'll get back into the spaceship and then you'll come back here. But it will wipe your mind to do this. And you won't remember a lot of any of this stuff, because first time voyagers, this is just the effect that it has on humans. So the fact that we have this thread of through our literature of these people doing this, and the discussion was all about how their minds were twisted by the process, that I think those kind of linguistics are valid. So something happened, they had some kind of a device and so on. And so you'd get the other kind of linguistics where you have people that are supposed time travelers like Corey Goode and Andrew Basiago, jump room to Mars, all of this kind of stuff. You know, Basiago's getting into this room in Sepulveda Boulevard and they're shooting him to Mars with Obama to shoot dinosaurs. And so, you know, it's
for 22 years, and then they regressed him back to life. And then he was looking at these little pods at people in these, and I was just like,
right.
The more details he said, the worse it got. Like it was almost, and no disrespect to him, because, you know, one thing I'll say about them, at the end, they were big Trump supporters. So I gave them that, but still it was like the story made bogus.
Well, here's something, you know, he says he's 108 years old, that he did that 20 and back 3 times. Okay. And he's 40 now. And I'm 64, and I can tell you that his mind is not the mind of someone who has lived longer than his chronological age, right? He's never experienced my supposition is that even if they try and wipe your mind of all the events you've gone through, those parts of your mind that dealt with illness in the 60s, the degradation of the body and this kind of stuff, those parts of your mind would not be wiped out because they're part of your body memory. And so his mind shows none of that. He doesn't show any of the signs of what it feels like to recover from of going back and getting youth again. The first time that would happen to you would alter your perception forever. Okay.
So he says he's 125.
No, 108. He says he's 108. He said that he's been gone. He got sucked up by the military when he was like 6. And when he was like, and then he was put into this program called 20 and Back, where you would sign your name on a contract and they wouldn't pay you for 20
lots of papers.
Years.
There were lots of stacks of papers.
Right. And then when you come back, though, the payment for all of this is that they put you right back 1 second from when you were taken, and you're in your old body. So you'll have all of those experiences and have lived 1 second in this reality. And it's like, well, you know, his brain is not, his language is not the language of someone whose mind has been through that. Okay.
Sounds like something I could just pull out of a hat, myself. Like sure. it really does. So it's just so ridiculous. The story, like if you said something like that, okay, you could technically like make something really sound good that really, I would be like, yep, it happens. You know what I mean? You could, because you would make these pregnant, but it's like he makes it almost like just a movie you see that.
Yeah, and he's stealing from movies is the problem. That's the problem, is he's actually been caught taking his source material from stuff that happened a few months earlier. Yeah. So there's actually a lot of those things online.
And somebody wrote in here, Jason Rice, and did you ever hear of him? I heard of him. He seems very humble and more, nice. I don't know. That's just my opinion. He was.
Yeah, but he's no more accurate, has no more proof for any of this stuff, right? And
none of them do. Nobody. Right.
And ultimately, they're in a bind, okay? Because once they tell you their story, hey, I went to Mars.
Right.
Well, okay, dude, fine. I'm going about my business. So in order for them to engage your attention again, they've got to say, hey, I went to Mars with Obama. And, and get that big flash in your brain, right? And then you're, okay, fine, dude, fine. And then you go about your business. And hey, I went to Mars with Obama. We shot dinosaurs. So it's in order to get the dopamine to get your attention, because we're in a human attention market, right? And so they've always got to keep coming up with stuff that's newer and so on and so on. And Corey tapped out. He just literally burned out in the terms of stuff he could bring in. And here the problem is, if you keep escalating like that, then you reach the point of absolute disbelief from everybody, because you end up back into the religion stuff again, right? Because there's nowhere to go, because your mind is incapable of doing that kind of thing in terms of perpetually spinning a new yarn.
Yeah, I mean, it's just so out there that it's just not even just. And if somebody that comes from somebody that feels like they're pretty aware of most things in this world, like really can't pull one past me, like from a realistic perspective. Like I see everything. I feel like I'm 10 steps ahead of everybody. I just feel like I would have some sort of a sign that, you know what I mean? That like, okay, maybe I'll give it, like I laugh,
Right.
it was almost like, and I wanted to look at his birthday just, but then, then you wonder, is this all just to get us, is this the new thing now where they're trying to get us so hyped up about all these things and now they're just coming out with the bogus stuff preparing us for like some fake alien spaceship something?
See, that's really probable
Right.
given the 1950s, the idea of the blue beam, the MK Ultra, the acknowledged, dosing of large segments of the population with all different kinds of psychedelics and weird stuff and
Right.
all the other mind control shit that they've done. So why should we presume that Corey Goode is not a disinfo agent intended to, because actually he has captured a very large segment of the UFO audience and maneuvered them away into fantasy land, right? Sword and sorcery kind of shit. And so, yeah, it could indeed be a plan. There's some suggestion that he's working for people, that he's an agent. And, the thing about these individuals is that there are very few tells. All right. So that he's lying. Okay. You look at him and you say, I don't believe you. I see you saying this stuff, but I think you're just full of shit. A lot of people do this, but there's a huge class of the public that has this willing suspension of disbelief, and they're looking for a tell. And so a lot of the good channelers and a lot of the good secret space program guys don't have any tells. And that a tell would be a facial tic, a mannerism, a speech affectation, where their body is assisting their consciousness to let you know that they're lying by this tell. Okay, and this is what card players look for. Is the tell in the other poker players that what their hand is like and so on. And these individuals that don't have these, though, in our social order, frequently, and I can't say that it's always that way, but frequently don't have tells because their mind is not in the normal frame of reference. Okay.
Mhm.
And that is they don't have the same level of emotional control over their face. So you'll see these people in the secret space program, especially, where their mannerism is very wooden, very, they tell you this stuff. They don't get excited about it really. They can maintain this facade of calm and so on and so forth. And it's kind of like, well, that's good, but you can believe me that if I had been to Mars and shot dinosaurs with Obama, I would be fucking flipping out about it when I told it to you. Oh, the
Or
blood was splashing on me and the recoil and all of
right.
that. Right?
But or guess what? If you really did that, you're probably not going to be saying you did it. Let's go to the logistics of anybody that works for NSA, FBI. There's a certain amount of things that they can say, and there's a certain amount of things they can't say. And if it's something
Which is most.
right, when they can't say, like the questions that I ask my NSA buyers, and they're like, I can't tell you that, and it's something that's like so small. What you think that these people are just going to come out here and say, without any repercussions? Like, it's not like, there's just something. It just doesn't even.
Okay, well, it has to do with how the mind thinks about stuff too. Your NSA guys know this. The CIA guys know this because they have protocols. They have like structure. You may, as an agent, not understand why you can't talk about this stuff.
Yeah.
But at some other level, it like would reveal tons of stuff. So let me give you an exact or a real precise example. So in the blue chicken cult, which is Corey Goode's blue space chickens, right? And all the people that pray to the blue space chickens. There was this person that had a peripheral role. We'll say that her involvement was soft, okay? She was supportive, PR person, made money off of them and this kind of thing, but may not be a blue chicken adherent, but was nonetheless attached to him. Because of all the blow up around the blue chickens trying to copyright secret space program and all these other words that affect a lot of us in this arena, she decided to distance herself from the blue chicken space cult, right? The blue space chicken cult. When she did so, she came out, and a lot of us on this side were expecting reveal, expose, tell all. And she didn't say anything about what was going on in the cult. She supposedly is distanced from them,
Interesting.
But no, this is the real key thing here. Hang on a second. So she gets on this guy's channel, Joe from the Carolinas, and he's a very nice guy. He's very laid back, and he questions her. Now, me, if she'd come and talk to me, it would have been more of a psychological interrogation. Okay. I mean, I would have gotten really serious about it. And so I'm in there hammering on the chat the whole time she's talking to Joe. And I keep repeating this same question over and over and over again, because all I wanted was the same question answered. And it was whether or not Corey Good's wife had to use notes in this interview that this woman did with Corey Good's wife. Okay. I'm not bringing up the woman. She's not particularly germane to this. She, in the entire many hours discussion that evening and over several days, the only single solid fact that she let loose was, and that was only because I insisted and hammered and hammered and hammered. She finally just said it just to get rid of me because she was emotionally fragile at that point, was that indeed Corey Good's wife had to use notes to keep the timeline straight during the interview.
Wow.
Now, exactly. So you see somebody who has
listen to this, Clif. And when I saw that video on the way they had the camera, you could see he was reading a script. It was a story. Yeah. You could see he was reading a story. Because he was like, and like, you could tell when I'm reading something. I might have some crazy eyes and I'm looking all over the place, but I have like a lot of screens. Okay. But you can tell when somebody's that means I'm not reading anything. I'm just and he was reading a script. You could see it.
The reason you can tell that is because there's 163 muscles in the human face you can see make things happen. We read by having these muscles called the medial muscles and the saccades move our eyes in a particular way. Your brain is so sharp. Your ability to see things is so sharp. You watched his eyes read, and thus you knew he was reading.
Yeah.
Even though you couldn't see that he was actually doing it, as eyes looked over here, you could actually see these small muscles moving. Yeah. That's how we get tells. Okay. Yeah. These people don't have tells. So I'm saying in a factual way that their mind does not function the same way as 75% of the rest of the population's mind, right? The people you might play poker with who would have tells, who'd get all excited if they got a good hand, that kind of thing. But you're quite correct. Now, the reason that this was pertinent about her having the notes was because it meant that in their relationship, husband and wife, he didn't tell her shit. She was just suddenly sprung into this one day, the entire timeline all filled out, all this stuff going on, and he's off doing all this weird stuff, and she had no idea any of this stuff was going on. She was co-opted into it because she had no choice. What's she going to do? Grab the kids and leave him because he's doing this when he's waving money at her and things. He's had $10,000 and $20,000 donations, that kind of deal, right? In a single pop. And so she bought into it, but in order for her to support the thing as an actor or as an actress, she had to have her sides, her lines, and they supplied them to her, and she was reading them during the interview. That's how lame their production quality is. They didn't even rehearse that.
Yeah. And you could see that, but then some people could argue and say, well, this is a documentary, but like I could see, there were some guys in there, like there was this 90-year-old man who was a Marine Naval Academy, who definitely had information on the Nazi stuff. And, that sounded really.
You mean William Tompkins?
Possibly 93 years old. He's kind of
yeah, and he's dead. He's dead now. Yeah.
This was recent. Yeah. Was it recent?
No, they put in film of someone who was deceased. Okay, William Tompkins. And William Tompkins was not as he was portrayed in their. You have to understand. None of the stuff they presented as fact is anything other than their interpretation.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. They say William Tompkins was designing spaceships for the U.S. Navy. And the thing was, in his day and age, there were a lot of kids that did comics, that drew all the time. And he drew dozens and dozens of spaceships, which he then later sent to the U.S. Navy. He was not commissioned to draw them. They didn't build them. He wasn't an engineer. It was just two unrelated things that in his later life, in his 90s, get connected by David Wilcock as proof that this guy was part of the secret space program. So, and this guy wrote bad sci-fi as an old man filled with nubile young women in scanty clothes with, 3 breaths, that kind of thing. Okay, so his mind was occupied with the fantasy world, and he fell right in with David Wilcock. Yes, he had a brief Navy career, no, he didn't do any of the debriefing of any of the spies from Europe or any of those kind of things. All of the Nazi stuff is common knowledge you can pick up out of dozens and dozens of books, and everybody basically knows it, and it's just part of the script. Bear in mind that when Corey Goode came on, and we really shouldn't, I don't know if we want to divert into the specifics, but when Corey Goode came onto the scene, he data mined this place called Project Avalon, which is a collection, is a forum that is a collection of tons and tons and tons of woo-woo stuff. UFOs, cloning, ghouls, ghosts, all different kinds of weird stuff showing up in there. And
Yeah.
he data mined it and wove a thread of a narrative through it and sold it to David Wilcock and Gaia TV. And Gaia TV put him out in front of the public. Now, part of this is a fault, if you will, of Jay Weidner. Okay, now Jay Weidner didn't create all of the people in the 1950s that said they'd been contacted by spaceships. The 1950s were a weird period of time because there were spaceships that flew over Washington, D.C. and caused all kinds of problems. There were 7 of them seen in Mount Rainier. There was all kinds of problems in Puget Sound with this strange case of these people being missing or killed as children and so on, all related to UFOs. And there was all this lot of activity in the newspapers related to UFOs. And so it would make sense that the LARPers of that age, whatever the trigger is for a LARP inside the brain, I'm not saying this in an evil way, because maybe there is some kind of a mental condition that favors live action role playing in your own brain, just the way my brother did with schizophrenia. And it's just simply as in a larger spread throughout society. And we're just seeing it manifest as I was abducted or I was contacted. Okay. And then at some point, the people tell their story often enough, they believe it even more, and it has more sincerity, and then they are able to sell it to the rest of the public. As they frequently say, if you've got sincerity, you can fake anything. So if you can fake sincerity, you've got the world by the tail. But so that kind of a situation exists where the 50s had all these kinds of people. Now we get to the point where it's resurrecting again with the whole Corey Goode kind of thing. Is this another sign of strange energies from space affecting these LARPers? We get into a weird situation here with the Corey Goode material, because he's saying that he's the guardian, he's the official. And so, no, Jason Rice had nothing to do with this business, so Corey Goode is the gatekeeper on all of this. But the fact of the matter is that Jay Weidner at Gaia was the gatekeeper. So Jay Weidner is a movie maker. He's a medium specialist. Okay, he understands the medium of communication, and he's such a good specialist that he performed an experiment for a corporation. And the experiment was, could we present the most outlandish material in such a way that the presentation methods that we choose cause that material to overcome the willing and trigger the willing suspension of disbelief? Said another way, can we get people to buy Corey's bullshit if we present it in an appropriate fashion? And that was the nature of the experiment for Gaia TV. They did that. Jay is very talented. Obviously, it worked. It was successful. They could get people to believe Corey's bullshit because of the way that they presented it, because it was seen with the authority of TV. So authority has always been, my big bugaboo being born into the military. So I don't accept orders from anybody, and I question all authority instantly just because they claim that. And so basically it goes back to the whole space alien thing and the vagus nervous system, right? You got this guy saying that he's the galactic ambassador to the space chickens who have no vagus nervous system and can't think of, couldn't think and don't have emotions and hormones the way we do. And yet he's saying that they are the authority for this particular galactic council and stuff that's going to oversee all of us. And you see this kind of repeated with different language with all of these UFO guys. UFO aliens are down here to help us. Aliens are down here. And it's like, okay, you sons of bitches. Okay, forget it. If we got aliens up there and they're telling me anything, I'm assuming that it's for their own damn agenda. And even if a blue chicken showed up here that could talk to me in English, he's going to be killed right away, or he's going to be captured or whatever, because I'm not going to accept some space alien as directing what a human should do and how I should react. And the idea that space aliens are going to come down here and hand us ascension, forget that. And also I know as a schizotypical, I feel the energies from space. I mean, I'm getting all amped up on them all the time. And I could get into big battles now, and it's a very Mars energy in that sense, a very aggressive, you know what I'm
Yeah.
saying, right?
And it's so funny because we'll find out because per his chart, 1960, he has Saturn conjunct Moon and Jupiter, and it's his Saturn return. So we'll find out all. So
Oh, and that's a bitch too when Saturn comes back.
oh, that's how I look at it. I'll just let the astrology to answer that, because it's true. Like I mean, we'll see.
Yeah. And it's, what is it? It's a 28-year cycle or something like that. So it's a long-term.
So
heavy.
you have one, and then to have another one usually is rare. So he's having his second one, and
Yeah.
then it's he's got an interesting chart. So you understand his moon, the way he thinks, is sitting with Saturn and Jupiter. It's like the two conflicts. It's called, like, Saturn is discipline, restrictions,
Right.
work with Jupiter in Sagittarius. It's like, this is so, we'll see. We'll see what happens. And it's in Sagittarius, though. He might believe his own stuff. He truly might believe everything he's saying. He might really have this
There's some of these people that I think that is the case. They do indeed believe. But there's also something else about this. Okay. Belief comes from the German belief, meaning I wish. Okay. And it's translated as belief means I wish this to be true. So there's a thing about belief that a lot of people don't understand. Um, Belief is an emotion. Okay. It's a hormonal response. And if you have control over your parasympathetic nervous system, you can create belief. So I could pass any kind of a lie detector test anybody wanted to give me. I could sit here and absolutely say, I believe Corey Good. I believe he's the Pope of the blue space chickens, and that we're all going to be liberated and go into this giant ascension. And I can generate belief in the back part of my brain such that my entire physiology will respond to the lie detectors, to all of the stuff they've got, as though I was indeed saying the truth. And this is because I have control over my vagus nervous system. I have conscious control. A lot of people have control over it, but it's kind of this weird sort of a wonky control because they're not aware of the mechanisms that they have to do in their head to have a concrete kind of control. And so he may believe and know that it's all fantasy at the same time. Those two are not incompatible in the human mind. So when you're reading Harry Potter, you believe absolutely as you're reading that, and you're in that state of belief while you're reading that. When you see a great movie, you're in a state of absolute belief. It's called the willing suspension of disbelief. Okay. And so belief is not this state that goes with you based on facts or any of this kind of stuff.
Right.
And to think about it that way causes some real problems for a lot of people. So I'm quite convinced Corey believes it, but his belief in it is meaningless to me because it's a fantasy story.
Yeah. Right. And that's true. I mean, is what it is. All right.
Yeah, you take enough drugs and the world gets really flaky.
Maybe I need to take drugs. That's the problem.
Well,
why I'm so damn uptight.
Yeah, see, the thing is, you probably could. All right, you're the kind of personality that may benefit from it. But these days, in order to do this, you'd need a guide. You would need to understand what you were doing. You'd need to like sort of plan out your approach to it. A little tiny bit just to get the flavor of the chemical and the feeling of the effects, and then jump into the shamanic dose later on after you've had some understanding of what it's like to come back and put your personality together. And you may decide after a recreational kind of an experience that way that you don't wish to do that shamanic. A lot of people don't. It's dangerous out there. There's, when you go to this space where there are other beings, there are many other beings that are 100% against humanity, 100% against you. They just are not able to act on it in that particular environment if you are strong enough to have gotten yourself there and be aware how you did it and so on, right? If you're not that strong, you're very vulnerable to their psychic intrusions. There's this guy they made a movie about him, Men Who Stare at Goats. Okay, Lynn Buchanan, he's like a remote viewer kind of a guy. And he's got a description of all of this. And he says, there's 4 kinds of aliens. And he does this from his remote viewing conscious control. He was one of the original people that did it. He's got an incredible track record. And he says that there's 4 kinds of aliens. And you can divide these 4 kinds of aliens into 2 groups: those that are less psychic than us and those that are as psychic as us. Not more psychic, just as psychic as us. And in each of these groups, there's aliens that don't like us. And then there's aliens that, they don't really care. They're neutral, they're friendly, okay?
Right.
So the aliens that are less psychic than us, that don't like us, they're not ever gonna come here. We scare the crap out of them, because when they come on in and they get around our planet, they know we have sorcery capability. Those aliens that do like us, that come here that are less psychic, they can actually see our planet with their understanding of these things, just because of the psychic radiation we're just emitting like you wouldn't believe. We show up like a sun. Now, the other kind of aliens that don't like us, or that are more psychic or as psychic as us, the ones that don't like us will do any damn thing that they can do to cause us harm. The others are neutral, all right? And this is Lynn Buchanan's understanding of it. And the aliens that are really the pain in the ass are those that are as psychic as us and don't like us. But again, they're not likely to come here, because when they do come here, their psychic expression is antithetical to ours. And so just the fact of being close to us rubs them the wrong way. So they're very, very rare in that sense. Now, the remote viewers I know, the military guys, I've gotten into that remote viewing community. Almost every single one of them I've talked to says that at the end, it's all aliens. Okay, that if they zero in on something, there's aliens involved. No matter what, if you go to the moon and look around, there's aliens all to hell and gone. If they go into, secret bases under the desert, there's aliens involved. So it gets a little wonky. Now, when you start talking to these guys, they'll say that there are impressions of other minds, but they are not in a position to be able to say this mind is avian or reptilian or whatever. It's just other. And my understanding is that they're not going to find a reptilian mind. They're not going to find an avian mind. They'll find a mind that has cognition, that is basically built around a hominid frame, that has some form of a very extensive polybranching vagus nervous system. This seems to be the unique characteristic, or a common characteristic. And the only other beings I've ever encountered that I know did not have that structure were the mantids. And they were not able to, or I didn't get to the point where they were able to explain to me how they were able to function without hormones and without the vagus nervous system and still have cognition, which they did, okay? So they could think. They didn't have a theory of mind as we understand it. So what one mantid thought, he could not teach another mantid if they didn't have this sort of a form of telepathy, a shared experience, then no mantid would be able to share any other mantid's thoughts. Now, in the years that I've had since I've had that contact with them, I've developed this theory that it was this kind of weird shared sort of almost telepathy that allowed them as that species to develop to the point where cognition could occur. And that because they didn't need training, they didn't need the ability to have love, they could progress as a species and as a civilization because they had the ability to share thoughts and could work towards a common goal. But they didn't have emotions behind that, right? If one of them decided not to work for the common goal, the others aren't going to give them any shit for it.
Right. Yeah. People are going crazy in this chat about these drugs. They're like, Heidi, yeah, you need to go. I'm not like, it's funny. I'm just not somebody that likes to lose control. Okay. Scorpio rising here. I like to be in control. So for me, like to go in that zone, I'd rather, I don't need to go in that. I feel like I'll go in that zone when I need to go in that zone, when I'm dead, So like right now, I just don't feel like it's necessary. What's it going to do for me here? That's just kind of how I'm like a realist. I'll solve crimes. I'll check out real facts, but like that kind of stuff, it just doesn't, I just can't get into it. I feel like you could be messing.
You can though. Okay. Now the thing is that you can bring back things that will help you out. You can bring back information that'll help out large groups of people that are not suffering what you're suffering. So my motivation for doing all of this stuff was to cure my own schizophrenia, okay? To deal with my own schizotypical nature. I learned a whole lot of stuff talking with these other minds. Okay. I've learned all kinds of engineering. I've learned tons of stuff about language, as may be obvious from what I've done for the past 20 years.
Yeah.
And I've learned a ton of stuff from that experience. And I've learned tons of stuff about myself and the rest of the planet. So I find those experiences to be absolutely invaluable to who I am at the moment. And I find that they are valuable to a lot of other people. However, you've hit on the key thing, right? You have no control, and the sensation of your body dissolving on you causes a shattering experience. Okay, you go through that and you emerge on the other side, and you start learning things. So the one guy described to me, the fellow with the emotions on the skin, he told me what humans were like. Okay, and he told me how we communicate, what communication was, what thought was, and then he described to me mechanisms, technologies that can be applied to the body that will cause alterations within the mind. Very much like I was discussing earlier. You know, we use breath. Breath is primarily the meditation tool. You control your breath. You look at a flame so that you concentrate your eyes on that flame. But your parasympathetic control is to shift you into, so you're controlling the vagus nervous system. But this guy that I was talking to told me about the technique with the eyes, and you start looking at some of these meditators, and you can see who has it, who doesn't. You look at some of these paintings of the old yogis, statues of Buddha, and you see the eyes in a particular frame, and they did an exact drawing of what they saw, the artists. They, without any understanding what he was doing at that time. But to somebody who's been told and who's experienced that, it's like, aha, that bastard knew. You know, he had been there. And so you can get to these places with meditation.
Right.
So you needn't take drugs. The problem is the amount of time that's involved to get there.
With meditation.
Correct.
It's
correct.
long. Right.
Right. You may not succeed in any given lifetime is the problem.
Right. Yeah. That's what a lot of like astrology people will say too. Like this guy Sam who comes on my show, he even says that same thing. He said, you know, quick way to get there is doing drugs.
Yep. And the reason that is, okay, the reason that is because we live in a particular kind of a body that has hormonal receptors for these drugs. So I smoke cannabis. The reason that I can smoke cannabis and get an effect from it is because I've got THC receptors, cannabinoid receptors throughout my body. So these are chemicals that are already within our body. Same thing with all of the psychedelics. All they do is trigger DMT, basically, okay, in a controlled fashion. I don't advise DMT as a drug per se, because not very many minds are able to, in my opinion, are strong enough or trained enough to get anything useful out of it. It's just such a huge splash in your head that you don't get much. It's a nice sort of an experience, but and it lasts 10 or 15 minutes. In the mescaline trips, you might be gone 2 hours, so you have lots of time to discuss with these things with people and stuff. But this guy in the mescaline trip told me all about how humans work relative to cognition and all these tools, and in many cases in these experiences, the first thing that comes out of the other mind that you're in contact with is, welcome, you've also discovered this path, technology, tool, etc., referring back to the psychedelic. Okay, so universe provides us with the receptors in our bodies as well as the plants to trigger them. So obviously, in my way of thinking, the two should meet in some people at some time for good effect. Now, the problem, of course, is that humans are buttheads. We overdo things, we get drunk, and all of this kind of stuff. So we're not really using the technology the way that it should be used. But for those individuals like myself, and it may be that you've got to be schizo or a schizophrenic or a schizotypical or in some way brain different from the normal in order to take these drugs and actually travel. Because I've talked to a lot of guys that have taken these kinds of drugs, and they've had fantastic experiences, but they've never traveled.
Yeah, I've never heard of traveling. I've heard of people just say they've seen weird stuff. They get scared, just like nothing that really excited me, that made me want to take it. Like nothing that made me sound like, ooh, that sounds fun. I mean, honestly, but I just think, but in the rishis used to, when they were writing the Vedas apparently and stuff, that's what they were doing.
Yep.
They were doing, drinking teas and all this, funny tea.
Okay.
Whatever,
so here's something, right? And this is, I'm going to dox you in a previous life. All right. Okay. So this is with your permission. I can discuss this. All right.
Absolutely.
Okay. So because of my perception, that has been altered by these drugs. I can see things in individuals and in patterns that suggest to my mind certain ideas. Okay. So I'm not saying this is factual. I'm saying that my mind has keyed in on certain things that I've seen in your personality that make me think that your last existence was in the time of the German or the Dutch or the Spanish Inquisition. Okay. Now, what people don't understand about humans, I needn't get into the triune human stuff and all of that, but humans, when they reincarnate, don't come back right away. It's very rare, extremely rare. It's usually a life that hasn't had much happen in one life, and so you're reborn right away. If you've got a lot of shit going on in your life, you're in the metempsychosis between lives for a long time. So you basically work through your karma, integrate it, take a long rest before diving in again, right? And so in my way of understanding things, your last incarnation was in the, 14 through say 1600s in Middle Europe, and you were killed as a witch. All right. Now, what's the Inquisition? Everybody has heard about the Spanish Inquisition and the terrible things that were done to the Spanish Jews at the time in order to get money from them. And that was what it was a money grab.
My roots are all from Germany and in that area too, just so everybody knows. Yeah.
And in Germany, it was different. All right. In Germany, it was so methodically, religiously oriented that whole towns had every living female killed. Didn't matter how old that female was. Infants were killed, toddlers were killed. All of the women in that village were killed. It was so common in the German Inquisition that there were whole towns that were bereft of women. And it caused major social changes within the German states that were all sort of loosely aligned at the time, right? And a lot of it, and all of it had to do with psychedelics. Okay, so the women that were killed because some women were using psychedelics to journey, and they were perceived of as the witches. They were also the ones who administered the psychedelics as treatments and cures and palliatives to the rest of the people in the town. So you can take a little tiny bit of psilocybin and you can get yourself not affected by anxiety. You can take a little bit more and you can cure a craving for sugar. You can take a little bit more and cure your craving for alcohol. And these kind of mind changes were being done through the psychedelic media, and they were directed by women. Women were the medicinal infrastructure of that social order. And at some point, they ran into a collision with the patriarchy of the Catholic Church. And the Catholic Church said, basically, nobody's, and this is when I won't go into that, but anyway, the Catholic Church had invaded Germany in a big way and was making a big push in there. And we got a word from this. When they did that, the Germans invented a new word from what these people kept saying. These people kept saying, by Gott, by Gott, by Gott, meaning by God, by my God, you shall do this. And from that, we get the word bigot. Okay, because these by Gott people were the ones that were killing all the women. They were bigoted against the women because the women had greater power in that social structure due to their being the gateway into the psychedelic world, which was also medicine at that time. Much of it delivered through beer. So the Germans had all different kinds of psychedelic mushroom beers.
And I hate beer too.
Okay, well, hey, it gets even stranger, okay? Because the German women that were in charge of the psychedelics were told it was a law, you can't make beer with mushrooms anymore. The Catholic Church figured that would do it, right? They can't make beer, these women won't have their psychedelic tools and they're gone. Well, the women started doing psychedelic vaginal poultices, okay? And so they would have the psychedelics, they would take them in a way that men could not. They would journey, they would get all this information, and the church was really, really, really ticked off at it. And guess what? Well, they frequently used broomsticks to insert the psychedelics. And this is why witches became associated with broomsticks. And that's how they were targeted. And so this leads to
go ahead, keep going.
Sure. And so this led to them slaughtering women because at one point the Germans said, well, that woman's a witch, but what about her daughters? And it's like, by God, kill them all. And so that's how we end up with the Inquisition that we've got at this stage. in terms of our understanding.
They're
Yeah.
just stupid things, okay? But it's funny you say that, because when you say that, that resonates. Because I think that's why I always tell people, I'm like, I can't put spells on people. Like, I don't have those powers, like none of that in my chart. And probably because I abused them last life. I think I was burned because I'm afraid of fires, that whole thing. But I remember one tragic thing that has ever happened to me. Well, two. One, I ran into a wall because I was running with my eyes closed. And the other one was I was flying around on a broomstick, and no joke, like, kid, this is me as a child, just zipping around with a hat on, flying around like as a joke, like thinking this is cute. And like literally probably like did some, like I was bruised there for a while. So it's just like, it's something weird. That's the only thing I remember too, like out of all of that stuff. So that's a very,
It's one of those
in a weird way, because like I was flying around on a broomstick at like 2. I mean, because I was, it's weird.
And of course, the closer you are, that is to say, the younger you are, the more that there is that bleed over still from the metempsychosis that you'll take with you. And so, unless you do something to capture it within your mental structure, you're going to lose a lot of these kind of. They're not even really memories, okay? They're impressions, feelings, states of being, and so on. And they go away, and they're just subsumed by all of the crap we get into and all the, the bluebird, spacebird shit around.
Yeah. Like that makes more sense to me than the blue chickens or whatever. Okay. What you just said. I mean, it does, but it makes more sense. All right. I'm going to let you go, but can I take somebody did a super chat. Nomos oh God, I wish I would have read this down better. No, NOMMOS.
Sure, Nemos, right.
Yeah, Nemos. Oh God, that's ridiculous. Okay, go ahead. Yeah, Nemos. What
do they want to know? What do they want to know?
That they just want to know about him.
Okay, so there's an anomaly. Okay, we have the cone heads, we've got their skulls, we've got their big bones, and we've even got bones of giants and stuff. There's also another anomaly that we have through our historical record, and that is these carvings that appear in countless cultures across many, many, many ages. Maybe this single carving has been replicated for 3,000 or 4,000 years in various cultures around the planet, in some of the most isolated cultures you can imagine, in the Philippines, in Micronesia, and Melanesia, places where there's tight structure, but they're not going to have contact with the outside world. These sculptures, these carvings, these petroglyphs are all of these really ugly marine animals, okay? These fish beings that can't walk, but have sort of little legs with sort of little feet, but they're not really as useful as like even seal feet, but they're obviously intelligent. They're fish beings, and the replication of these ugly beings is the same level of ugliness is transmitted throughout all of these drawings across all of these cultures around the whole damn planet. You can find these drawings in the far north, the equator, or the far south. It doesn't matter where you go. And these are drawings of the Nemo. The Nemo were the first species that came here, and they built us, okay? And so if I did a long talk with this.
With Jenny, yeah.
Correct. So I was just going to say, go and look at.
Go to Jenny's channel and go. Honestly, that was a great chat.
Yeah.
Definitely. Go watch that, because Jenny Moonstone, it's on my show every week. Go watch her. Clif has a great thing on that. The whole presentation's basically on this.
Yeah, that's all it was. Yeah.
Yeah.
We go into great detail about it. Yeah.
Right. All right. And then let's see, was there another one? Sirius B.
Sure. That's part of the whole Nemo thing, okay? Because there's Sirius is a presumed star. If you're just looking up in the night sky, you can see a bright star, very bright star.
Right.
It's actually 3 stars, Sirius A, B, and C, and there's planets around the Sirius star. The Sirius star is actually a star cluster that's separated by many hundreds of light years, but from our perspective, it all seems to be like basically one dot. There's no way we could have ever known that there was a binary solar system, that there were actually 2 stars orbiting each other. And in fact, that there's a little tiny 3rd star way the hell out there. And the Dogon knew this, and we only discovered this in the 1950s forward using technology, and they've known it for thousands of years. And in fact, a huge number of tribes in Africa used to describe this one little seed as Sirius C. It was the smallest food seed they had, and so it represented the small Sirius star. And that you can't see that with your eyes. I can't even see the separation with the from the Sirius star cluster with these magnifying night vision goggles, but I can clearly see Okay, so if you're going out and looking in the sky, the average human can see 600 stars. A lot of those are actually constellations or galaxies, but from our perspective, they look like stars. Until you get these night vision goggles, then you're seeing 60,000 things in the sky, and you can easily separate out star clusters from individual stars. And you can't see Sirius B or C with these. And yet the Dogon knew about this. Well, they knew about it because the Nemo told them.
And Lyrans.
Yeah. Okay. So that gets back into, there's no proof that we've ever had any contact with any of these kind of things. There's a lot of the rumors that we've seen aliens and we've interacted with them, and it goes back to even into the Nazi Thule Society stuff, but we don't have any evidence. And so when people start saying, Pleiadians, I know, the Pleiadian spy thing, but I'm just throwing up, when people, when they start throwing up Lyrans or, Zeta Reticuli and this sort of thing, we do not have any evidentiary support that there's any life that's ever visited us from there. There's some hints in our literatures and stuff for Zeta Reticuli being associated with the Greys. The Greys are of a nature of a kind of a being that could transit outside of time without being affected as much as we are. This is because the Greys are a fourth order being. They all look alike. Okay, there's very, very, very little differentiation to them, which tells me that they're much cruder as a being than we are. They're nowhere near as advanced. They may not even have a vagus nervous system, as far as I know. But there's something about the nature of the order of beings. We're fifth order beings. We're very highly differentiated. We have a huge range in our species, and so fourth order beings are much closer together in terms of their nature. Third order beings, you just can't tell apart. So an amoeba is the third order being, or a paramecium. You can't really tell one from another. There's no differentiation. You get to fourth order, there's some small level of differentiation. You can tell one type of chicken from another type of chicken, but within those type of chickens, there's not really that much differentiation within the individual types. All Baird rocks look alike, all Americunas look alike, basically. But when you get to fifth order, you start getting into the spread of complexity and differentiation. This is the natural evolution of universe, greater and greater and greater and greater complexity. Not, as people will tell you in the UFO world, for us to go and destroy our DNA and turn into the Greys and then come back in time to try and capture new DNA to rebuild ourselves. Bullshit, guys. DNA doesn't structure our lives any more than, the number of sand grains in your house or anything like that. DNA is not as people have been told, right? It's a storage system. It's not a mold. And so the way in which we think about things is totally screwed. But the Lyrans, the Zeta Reticulans, and so on. Zeta Reticuli is the only one that I've ever found any kind of substantiation within the vast areas of literature that you can get at that suggest we've actually had some knowledge of that system. When the only way we could is if someone came here from there. Now, it's also true, in my opinion, our transistors, fiber optics, printed circuit boards, all of these different kinds of things are from captured or destroyed or damaged alien vessels that we've re-engineered. And so I do believe there's been contact. And that's what I think this giant secrecy system is all about. And that's why I think we're missing $21 trillion. Not because it took that much to re-engineer the ships, but it took that much to kill a lot of people and keep this whole thing secret.
Keep it secret. Yeah.
And we've now reached that point, by the way, where the amount of money going to secrecy is many times every year what we're actually spending on this stuff we're trying to keep secret. So we're in that snowball place where it's about to break open.
After thinking about that, it definitely confirmed the United States is a Scorpio rising chart, though, because it's all about secrets. Somebody just asked Rh negative blood.
That's a whole. That's going to be a whole thing on its own. Okay. We can't. I've got to get some more water and do other stuff. So I don't have the time for that. That's another hour or two. Yeah.
All right. Well, next show we'll do that.
Next show. There you go. There you go.
All right. Cool. Well, that's good. Thanks so much, Cliff. And I'm sure everybody enjoyed this because it was different. So
cool. And I hope the is satisfied with your report.
Yeah, I love it. I love talking. I like talking about this stuff with somebody that's a logical person. That's what you need to hear. All right. Thank you so much. And thanks guys for watching, and have a great weekend.